the record button so that we get going here.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Nicole Touches. I'm an agroecologist with the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute, which means that I study how to build agricultural production systems in terms of management practices that we use, like how to manage the crops. We try to develop systems that use management practices that not only have that minimize the environmental impact of agriculture, but we're now working to design systems that actually create benefits for the environment. Those benefits include things like greenhouse gas or carbon dioxide offsetting. So there's a goal in agriculture of actually being able to take CO2, take more CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it in plants in the soil. To do that more than agriculture emits, therefore creating sort of a net benefit for our fight against climate change. We're also working to design systems that reintroduce habitat for our native wildlife and especially pollinators. That includes not just honeybees, but a lot of our own bees that are native to Wisconsin, even fly species and moths, and even birds that are beneficial for pollination, and whose numbers have been drastically reduced because of displacement of their traditional native habitat by human activities, primarily agriculture. So we are, what's another example of benefits? We're also trying to create systems with healthy soil that filter the water and make sure that our surface and groundwaters are staying pure and clean for recreation and for human health. So those are all of some of the landscape level ecosystem services, we call them, that we're working on improving the environmental footprint of American agriculture. But that's on the big scale. And we're also really interested at Michael Fields in designing food systems that work for everyone and not just a few, and not just the moneyed few. And we're interested in reintroducing small farming and smaller, more local and regional food systems back into our public consciousness. So big thing of what we want to work on at Michael Fields and do work on and have a history of working on is helping small farmers, helping connect local communities with locally grown food. And to that end, that's kind of what I'm here and I want to talk to you all about supporting is how we can grow some of our own food for our families, for our neighbors, for our friends, and thinking about producing some of that food fresh. Because does anybody know, well, I'll just say, since we're all on mute, the freshness of food is actually the primary factor in its nutritional value. So even beyond organic and conventional, where it's produced, what kind of soil, what kind of management practices are used, a number of studies have shown that the time between when you pick a fresh fruit or vegetable and when you eat it is the primary determinant on how much nutrition that food is delivering. Which means that when we grow our own fruit and vegetables, we're packing the biggest nutritional punch and keeping ourselves the most healthy. You're also exposing yourself to some of the our native microbes and pollen that we're around all the time. So I read recently that eating honey from your produced in your local area, because it has all the local pollen that you're breathing all the time, eating local honey can actually help with your allergies, as opposed to eating honey from Montana with like different flowers. So anyway, it's high time we move on. But those are some of the things we work on at Michael Fields and that I want to share with you today. Just some tips and tricks for to jumpstart your gardening activities this year and beyond. And feel free to jump in at any point with questions. This is not a super formal, I don't want this to be a super formal presentation. So feel free to unmute and jump in and interrupt me and ask questions as they come to you. But our mission at Michael Fields, real quick, to help both rural and urban farms. We work in both Madison and Milwaukee. And our goals are to create communities that are healthy environmentally and economically and socially. So we work in field research, education, which is what I'm talking to you all about today, and policy work. We advocate for policy that helps sustainable agriculture, both on the state and the federal level. You can sign up for our newsletter, The Fields Report, at michaelfields.org, or you can email me. You also can find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. All right, enough for our plugs. We're taking a high-level overview today about whole garden planning, really. So when we're thinking about planning, we have sort of short and long-term sort of questions. And I want to encourage you to think about both, because if we just plan in the short term, we may not be addressing all of our long-term goals. So these are some examples of things that we may think of on a yearly basis. So what do I want to plant in my garden? Am I buying plants, or am I starting them from seed? Who do I want to plant next to who? How am I going to react when I see certain pests? Do I have a plan? Am I going to do anything? Do I know what my tools are to react to pest problems? And those are all really great questions. Everybody who farms at any level encounters those. However, more long-term, it really benefits our operations to think about, what is my crop rotating? Am I rotating crops, or am I growing vegetables in the same place, or am I growing like tomatoes, say, in the same place year after year? Hint, that's not a good thing. Am I thinking about using and rotating with different sort of groups or families biological of vegetables? So I'm going to go through what those are and how to think about that. It's not too complicated. Am I thinking about improving my infrastructure and lowering my costs, or getting more bang for my buck that I invest in my gardening operation? Am I improving my soils? Am I incorporating manure and or compost for fertility? All right, so I also am going to make a plug for organic. I'm going to focus on organic practices in this presentation, as we do at Michael Fields. We primarily work with organic agriculture. Why is organic so important? Well, it's helpful to just decide to go organic because you don't need to worry about which herbicides affect which plants. This is a picture of damage or herbicide drift onto a tomato plant. That's always a bummer. Some people really suffer from herbicide drift or contamination of compost even. Pesticides can kill pets. That's another worry. It's something that I kind of worry about. When you see the little signs that say that people apply pesticides to their lawns, the vast majority of those aren't immediately harmful to pets, but we don't know what all of the potentially adverse effects is. So it's just something to consider. That we have a personal story with this. My husband grew up and there's a soybean field behind his house. And one of his dogs, when it was young, it was sort of in the pesticide spray operation. And after that, the poor dog had seizures for the rest of his life. So a lot of these are neurotoxins and they're really damaging. Pesticides, even applied on your lawns, they can make their way into water runoff going down the storm sewer and create urban pollution. Agricultural runoff is why we have all that algae on our lakes. So the less that we all can contribute to that is a good thing. And then also, a lot of these pesticides, even that people spray in their homes, can kill our honeybees and other beneficial pollinators. So it's just really important to be very careful and really to avoid them if you can. In a more positive light, I want to talk about crop rotation in your gardens. So crop rotation was actually a technology discovered in the ancient world. They figured out, or they observed, sort of through trial and error, that if you don't grow, say, wheat year after year in the same place, if you rotate with beans, say, which are a legume, and beans and peas, both legumes, they actually have the ability through a relationship with soil microbes that's special only to the legume family. They have this special adaptation where they can create favorable living conditions in their root tissue for what are called rhizobia bacteria in the soil. And those bacteria have the ability to take nitrogen in the form of N2 out of the atmosphere. Nitrogen is 78% of our atmosphere, by the way. So there's a lot of it hanging around, but plants can't access N2. So what's special is these bacteria can take the N2 out of the air and convert it to a water-soluble form, like ammonia or nitrate, that plants can take up and then use. So they do a lot to improve the fertility of the soil. And nitrogen is the nutrient that plants need the most. So it's the most important plant nutrient. And it would get depleted in soils that grew wheat year after year. So once legumes got introduced into rotation in terms of cropping with our grains like rice and wheat, voila, that was a big agricultural revolution. If you look at many of the cuisines around the world, they'll feature a grain and a bean as a big part of their cuisine. They'll have a grass grain and a legume. Almost all civilizations that engaged in agriculture around the globe have this. And that's because those two crops work really well together. Some problems that we run into from not rotating is we get insect pest buildup. If a particular insect, if they know that their favorite plant host is going to be in the same spot year after year, their numbers are just going to grow and grow because they continue to eat and breed and proliferate, and there they are. And a lot of these insects are adapted really well to one crop, so they'll survive in the residue of that crop in the same place, hatch the next year, and then there's your outbreak right there. When we rotate out of a certain crop, they might not be able to eat the next year's crop. They may not be able to survive in the residue of a different crop from over the winter. So that's why we can start to break some of these pest cycles. Same thing with diseases. This is a picture, anyone who's grown squash or pumpkins a lot will recognize this. This is powdery mildew on a pumpkin. Those will survive in that tissue and they'll come back and to bite you the next year. So if we rotate away out of a plant that's a host for these pests, we won't experience these issues. Also, you'll run into poor soil health because soil microbes need a diversity of plant residues and inputs and different kinds of roots. If you look at a native system, none of them are monoculture or one plant, right? Or if they are, that's a really unhealthy area. So we try to mimic nature as much as we can. Okay, this is one big omnibus slide, so forgive me, but these are all of your sort of different cards, or this is your deck that you can pull cards from to rotate through, right? So I mentioned legumes. In green, I've got sort of the pros for each of these, and then in red, I have the cons. So legumes are things like beans, peas, any type of green bean, any type of like pinto or black bean. Peas are also legumes, clovers are legumes. Like I said, they input N into the soil. They form a lot of relationships with soil microbes, so they're good for soil health. However, they tend to get diseased really easily, especially if they're planted in a big bunch and there's not good airflow through your canopy. This can happen with peas, especially when they're planted very densely. So you just want to make sure that you don't have a giant mat of legumes above ground, so you can get nice wind and airflow through there. So that will help stave off some of the potential disease problems. Another option is brassicas. Brassicas actually exude sulfur chemicals from their roots that repel soil pests like nematodes. Nematodes are little microscopic worms in the soil. Most of them are beneficial in the soil, but there are a few that are pests. There are root knot and root cyst nematodes. And so brassicas can do good because they'll knock down nematodes in your soil. So really, and then lots of great brassica vegetables. It's any of the mustards, cabbage, kale, collard greens are all brassicas. They also produce early. Some of them you can see it in the fall. The con with brassicas is that there are a lot of worms or larval pests that you'll find, in cabbage or on the underside of kale roots. It gets icky. You can control those by dusting with a product like Diatomaceous Earth or an insecticidal soap. So we can do things to control these organically, and I can come back to that a little bit later. I'm guessing that the Solanaceae, so our tomatoes and our peppers, are probably what most of us look forward to growing the most. Really delicious crops. Eggplants are also Solanaceae. Many of us, anybody who's gardened in Wisconsin will have had late blight on tomato. So that's around August when you start to see yellowing and browning and withering of your tomato vines. That's a bacterial disease. And that will certainly build up if you grow tomatoes in the same space year after year. And again, and on peppers too, these two are closely related. So you want to rotate out of these guys. Cucurbits are any of our squashes we talked about, sort of the disease issues that you can see with cucurbits, especially the powdery mildews. These guys are fast growing. There aren't a lot of pests, and they also are really competitive with weeds because they put on all this biomass and tend to shade out weeds. Yeah, the cons are the disease, and these guys are also heavy feeders, as they say, of soil nutrients. So you really want to make sure that you're fertilizing heavily ahead of these with a good helping of compost and manure. And also these guys like to use a lot of calcium and potassium. So bone meal is an organic product that's really great to incorporate into your soil ahead of growing cucurbits. And then lastly, on this slide at least, are tubers, things like potatoes, which are actually also a solanaceae. You sort of manage them more like a tuber though. And then onions, garlic, carrots. These guys are productive and easy to establish, but they also tend to use a lot of fertility. And you may or may not have some pest problems in these guys. So this is another category that you'll definitely not want to grow in the same space in 2 years. Sort of my rule of thumb, my slide's not advancing. Oh, I think I have to click on it. My rule of thumb is that you want to practice at least 3 years of rotation. So if you grow tomatoes in one bed, you want to rotate to other crops for at least the next 2 years, at least, and then you can rotate back to tomatoes. So that would be like now in 2021, if you want to grow tomatoes in a spot this year, you might not grow tomatoes there again until 2024. So this is what you might want to think about, sort of what your space and your layout is. And then I would advise incorporating fertility amendments like compost or manure at least every fall, and if you can, both in the fall and in the spring. Okay, how am I doing on time? 6:20, we're in good shape. Okay, I'm gonna pause. Are there any questions about any of that? Feel free to unmute and speak up.
If you guys don't know how to unmute, this is Michelle. Feel free to put it in the chat because Nicole is a highly trained professional in Zoom introductions and sessions. So she'll see it too, as will I.
And if you need to access the chat, you can hover your cursor over sort of the top of your window. And you should see a black bar pop up. And the chat button should be located in the center of the black bar. Okay. I'll keep an eye on it as we keep going. No, we're good. Okay, I'm gonna move on to seed starting. Feel free to drop anything in the chat or interrupt me if something comes up. Okay, in a previous workshop that I gave on this information, people were most enthusiastic about this topic. So starting your own seeds, and I got a lot of questions. Oh, sorry, I gotta click on this. Okay, why would we want to start plants ourselves? Many of us are probably, or have probably, myself included, gone to the store and around about now, beginning of May, you see those big fat tomato plants. You're like, great, what a great start to my garden. I'm gonna put those in. It's gonna look fantastic really early. That's fine, but there are some reasons that you should consider investing in some seed starting at home. And one of those is because big box stores offer limited choices. They generally only have your standard beefsteak tomatoes, Romas, maybe 4 different kinds of peppers. When you start at home, you have access to the entire seed catalogs that's out there. It's super easy to buy lots of different kinds of seeds online. So you can get some really fun things like these lemon cucumbers, they're lemon striped. You can start heirloom tomatoes like this beautiful black crumb. I'm a big fan of pepperoncinis, which you never see in the big box stores, so I always have to start them myself. So that's a reason. You can grow some more fun stuff and be able to produce some of the things that you see at the farmer's market that you don't see anywhere else at your own house. Another reason to start plants yourself is because big box store plants can bring diseases and contaminants into your garden. This is a picture of tomatoes here that are suffering from a pretty bad late blight infestation. Some late blight outbreaks that sort of spread like disease wildfire across the Midwest a few years ago were traced back to Home Depot and Walmart sold plants. They tend to run into these issues because they produce so many plants in one spot in the greenhouse, and so one infected plant can really, infect and affect a lot of different plants, which then just go out to everybody. And it's a real bummer to have this happen. When you start your own plants, you have a lower likelihood of running into these disease problems, which is great. Because once they get disease, there's not much you can do about it to stop it. Some big box stores also will pre-treat their plants in the greenhouse or once they arrive at the big box store with neonicotinoids. These are the pretty now infamous products that kill honeybees and other beneficial pollinators. And the bad thing about them is not only are they harmful when they spray them, but they can actually be systemic and survive sort of in the plant tissue so that even weeks after application, a pollinator can still encounter those on the plant that was sprayed and in toxic or lethal doses. So we really want to stay away from plants that are treated with these for our beneficials. Also, it's not just from an environmental perspective that we want to preserve our pollinators. Probably some of the top 3 questions that I get from people around gardening are people having pollination issues, like they'll have flowers on their vegetable plants that just don't end up turning into fruit. There's a variety of reasons that can happen, but the more we can do to get more pollinators buzzing around and visiting the flowers in our garden, the better chance we have to get a bumper crop. What is another reason to start your own seeds is you can get seeds that are clean from these seed companies that have really good reputation, like High Mowing, Seed Savers Exchange. These are seeds that have been inspected and they're not coming with viruses, they're not coming with weed seed. You can support companies that are doing really good things like Seed Savers Exchange, like some other companies that are producing organically and that have sort of equitable and fair trade and social initiatives. And so it's just it's just easier to sort of support some of those more eco-minded seed companies when you're starting your own seed. All right, so what are the steps that we need to think about when we're undertaking seed starting? We need to set up a growth chamber. You'll need lights, maybe some heat, and then also good ventilation, so maybe a little fan. You'll need to have trays with growth media like potting mix. You want to aim to plant seeds 1 to 2 months before planting. 2 is getting a bit far. It sort of depends on how fast your starts grow, which depend on how high of a quality your light and heat are. You'll figure this out with experience when you need to start. You'll need to water for that month or 2, and then you want to harden off outside and then plant in your garden. So, there are a lot of products out there to support infrastructure like this. You see this is a big, nice shelf. It comes with all the grow lights, comes with nice trays. Look, these plants are growing beautifully. It's $600. That's really expensive. We can make this for way cheaper. All you need to buy is a shelf, find the lights that sort of meet your needs and your price point. Trays are super cheap. You can go from there. Do not try, I advise you do not try putting seeds, little pots like this next to a window, even if it's your sunniest south-facing window. That's not a good enough light source indoors for your little seedlings. It won't work. I don't advise you to try it. You can put your starts by a window and have additional light sources hanging around. That would be nice. So the biggest sort of informational barrier I think people have is understanding grow lights and what plants need. There are so many great options out there now. I don't know if it's supporting people, there are just more people interested in starting their own seeds in their house, if it's because of sort of the burgeoning hemp and marijuana folks growing indoors. I don't know, but there's a lot of new light sources out there in the last 5 or so years, and there are many like very affordable options. So when you're looking up plant lights, you can really literally just type into Google plant grow light into Google or Amazon. You'll have a number of options come up. Amazon has a lot of good options, and so does Home Depot. I'll show a couple of those in the next slide. I would suggest that you get LEDs. They have a long life. They'll last many, many years. And the great thing about LEDs is that they give you a lot of light and low heat. So they're not going to scorch those seedlings that are sitting under your light, which used to happen with some of the older non-LED sources. I don't tend to look for the high output LED label, but you can assume that the more expensive grow lights are probably in this category, whereas the more $50 and under fixtures are going to be more standard LEDs. In short, just know the more money you spend on a light fixture, the more intensity you're going to get from it and the faster growth you're going to get. So those are the trade-offs. And I'll show a little bit more of that later. Do not get incandescent bulbs. They throw way too much heat. You guys probably know this from just home lighting, but just avoid that. The lowest prices that I saw were sort of in the $35 to $50 range, which really isn't bad. You can spend up to $200 on a really awesome light fixture, which we did at Michael Fields, and the results are fantastic. So I'll show you that in a little bit. But you absolutely can get great starts with the cheaper option. You just won't get as much coverage, and you may have to buy more than one over time to sort of direct on your trays, but it totally works. I've used those cheaper ones for many years and been happy with the result. Another option, if you're going the non-LED route, is to get T5 fluorescent light bulbs. They're available in any hardware store. There are a lot of T number fluorescent lights. The T5 ones have that spectrum of light that's sort of good for growing plants. So you want to stick with T5 as opposed to T8, which you'll see in the same fluorescent lighting section. So you can just buy the T5s in any fluorescent light fixture. Just a quick note about what plants need. Red light stimulates vegetative growth. So that's like stem and leaves, all the green parts. Red light also does stimulate flowering once a plant gets big enough. But if you give it only red light, a plant will become too tall and spindly. Blue light sort of regulates that plant growth, so it makes them more robust and strong and stocky. But if you give too much blue light, not enough red light, then you get these short, stocky seedlings that look stunted. So you really got to balance these. But really, plants need mostly yellow light. So you want to think about providing the majority of yellow light, which most growth fixtures are. And then if you really get a good fixture, it'll be sort of 7 out of 10 lights will be yellow, and then another 2 out of 10 will be red, and then 1 out of 10 will be blue. So you'll see the red and blue mixed in there. It's definitely good to mix and have a little red and blue light around. So these are this is the important slide. These are what's available. This is that really awesome light fixture that we've invested in this year. It germinated tomato seeds in 3 days, which is insane. I've never had that before. So this thing was really awesome. It was also $180, which is probably the most I would ever spend. I got a couple of these. See, this is a red and blue light fixture. This was $35, just a LED matrix. So this was really nice. I got one of these and I got 2 yellows, and those were all sort of pointing at a big shelf. Then here's an example of a fluorescent light fixture. You can get ones that hold 5 bulbs. 1 bulb will not be enough really for like an entire tray. So you'll want to think about getting more than one bulb. Here's another great fixture for $60. And then they make on Amazon, this is a pretty popular product if you're just trying to keep your outdoor plants alive over the winter. It's got these sort of LED stick wands that you can bend and sort of position over your plants. This is only $30. Wonderful, wonderful options. And then just some quick tips about maintaining your lights. You want to replace your fluorescent tubes when the ends darken. You want to clean any of your fixtures. Just swipe across them with a dusting cloth. Dust and dirt can dramatically decrease the amount of light emitted. And then what's most important is you really want to, unless you have a really high intensity light. So if you're dealing with more of the cheaper light fixture options, you'll want to position that light just like 4 to 6 inches above your tray when you're starting those seeds. And then as the plants grow, you move it up so that it doesn't scorch your seedlings. So you'll get way better light intensity if you keep it close to your soil edge. Again, unless you have a high intensity light, you'll know because you'll sort of feel the heat under the light, and that also impacts how close you can have it. Another thing that's important for starting seeds, you'll want to keep your lights on for 16 to 18 hours a day. So I have mine in a power strip that's plugged into a little automatic timer that plugs in to the outlet. Many of you probably have them for Christmas lights already, those timer outlets, your switches, and keep them on for at least 16 hours a day. If you don't, you'll get tall, spindly, etiolated plants because they aren't getting enough light. So if you see that you have tall, spindly plants, try increasing the duration of your irradiation per day, and that'll probably fix the problem. Pause for questions. No, we're good? Okay, looks like we've got 10 minutes left. So I want to move on to options for companion planting. Why would we want a companion plant? Well, one of the biggest reasons is pest prevention, and then also to get that diversity of plants sort of in an area, like I said, which is good for soil health. So some plants I want to share that are really beneficial for preventing pest incursion is actually, they're also lovely to grow. So lavender is a great picture of lovely lavender. It has that lavender essential oil in it, and that's the plant makes it. It's a pest repellent. So plants don't like that, or insects don't like that smell. It can be toxic to them if eaten, those aromatic compounds. And so if you grow lavender sort of in a strip along the edge or interplanted, say with your cabbages, that can help prevent pests. Mint has is another one with anti-pest properties. If you have gardened before, you know that mint is a big rapid spreader, so you might want to keep it in containers that you just sort of drop around your garden, maybe not have a patch of it because it'll take over your whole growing area, but it's good in containers. If you have cats, growing catnip can be fun for your pets. It also has pest prevention sort of built in through those compounds. And sage. So again, you can plant these around the outside of your garden. You can plant them sort of intermittently in strips in your growing area, and they'll help you repel moths, fleas, flies, and mosquitoes. I've even read that if you put a lot of these around your patio or your deck, that they can help sort of ward off some of the mosquitoes. I'm going to try it in earnest this year. I'm sure we're all willing to try anything. I think you need a lot of plants to have any anti-mosquito properties, but good to try. So, okay, let's see. Oh, more options for preventing pests. Chrysanthemums, they actually naturally contain pyrethrins. Some of you may recognize this. It's actually a pretty widely used insecticide. So a long time ago, they extracted those compounds from mums, the flower, and turned them into an insecticide. Nowadays, they synthesize the chemical, but still. So chrysanthemums are another thing to plant around. It doesn't flower until later in the year, so this might be more helpful for your fall vegetables. Marigolds are pretty well known. They even repel rabbits. Most people who use marigolds will plant them around the perimeter of their bed or their garden plot. And then also nasturtiums, which are another one of my favorites for their beauty. They repel some flies and squash bugs and even aphids and cabbage loopers. So those are good to plant in strips, especially next to your cole or brassica crops. Excuse my kitty here. Another question I get a lot is what is good to plant next to tomatoes? You'll want to plant tomatoes pretty far apart because they bush out and take up a lot of room. So that leaves you some room in sort of the alleys between plants. Other plants that are beneficial to tomato are sort of garlic, parsley, and basil. So you can plant those sort of intercropped with your tomato. We don't know exactly why these plants are so good for tomato, but it's just been observed through gardening experience that they tend to complement each other. I think maybe because of some of the pest and disease, anti-pest and disease properties of some of these species that they tend to aid tomato. Another really popular example of companion planting is what was called the Three Sisters, and this was a system that was pioneered and perfected by Native Americans in North America, and that's where they would grow. So I have to move my window here. Where they would grow corn in wide rows, so say 2 to 3 feet apart. And then in between the corn rows, they would plant beans, the climbing kind, not the bush kind. And then in sort of intermittent mounds amongst the bean rows, they would make little, in intermittent spaces in the bean rows, you'd make a little mound. And then you would put in 2 or 3 squash seeds, it's like pumpkins or squash gourds, any of those sort of cucurbits, and those would sort of grow in a prostrate, sort of spready, viney manner. So those would sort of fill out your floor and prevent weeds. And then the beans would use the corn as a trellis, and they would crawl up the corn, and then you could pick the beans. And so all of these 3 species sort of complement each other, fill different niches in terms of warding off pests and weeds. So this is a fun option to experiment with as well in terms of intercropping. I'd also encourage you to think about borders and natural fences. These are elderberries, I believe, which is beginning to be a popular sort of hedgerow. Elderberries, they're sort of a woody shrub, but they do get rather tall, as you see here. Elderberries have wonderful health properties, and they're also a native to our area, so they're beneficial that way. And these are perennials, so if you choose to grow these, they'll take 3 or more years to really start to grow large. If you want something that's just going to get big in 1 year, sunflowers are a great option. You can also harvest and save the seeds. Use them year after year. You can eat them, you can roast them. They're great for the birds. I didn't even eat any of my sunflower seed this year, but I put it all in my bird feeder and saved myself a little money feeding birds. So that's a good option as well. And I just had to throw this picture in here because it's amazing. But kudos to anybody who takes the time to do this. It's beautiful. And then I alluded a little bit to organic chemicals to help us control pests. We need to be careful with these too. Any of these anti-pest products potentially can be harmful for humans, though all of these tend to be sort of acutely harmful, but they don't have those long-term health. If you're exposed to a lot of them, mostly on your skin or drinking, I don't think any of us are going to probably drink them. Whereas conventional chemical herbicides and insecticides and fungicides, they tend to have these longer term health effects that we're just starting to understand more fully. We know that these organic chemicals don't have those problems, but you want to be careful and read the label of anything you're applying. So these are three big categories of popular organic sort of chemical options that you can use to help ward off pests. Insecticidal soaps, they can control soft-bodied pests, which include aphids, mealybugs, thrips, and whiteflies, and mites. We'll probably have some mite damage this year because it's a dry year and mites tend to do well, tend to proliferate in dusty conditions, which we'll probably have this year. So keep an eye on the mites. They cause a lot of the little brown pinprick speckling feeding on bean leaves, especially. Insecticidal soaps are good for that. They're really just like soapy, so they gum up sort of the insects so that they can't do their thing and die over time. You really need to coat the plant so that the insects are going to encounter this and get gummed up. If you're watering your plants a lot or if it rains, these things will get washed off. So you really want to make repeat applications of these probably once a week until you see the pest pressure start to go away. BT it usually comes in a powder form that you have to mix with water. On the consumer end, you'll probably find some formulations where it comes pre-mixed with water that you can just spray right away. But it is a powder in suspension, so you want to make sure you shake that really well, mix it up. It actually causes crystals to form in larvae's guts, and then the crystals will sort of gum up and tear their digestive systems apart, and they'll kind of die from the inside out. They don't work immediately because you can imagine that process takes a few days, but they do stop feeding immediately once they encounter and ingest these BT products. So even if you still, after you apply, even if you still see them on your plant, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not working. It's just that they haven't died and fallen off yet. It does break down in sunlight, so apply in the late afternoon or evening. And like I said, it will control larvae primarily. So this is a great option for those larvae feeding on your kale and your cabbage, especially. However, BT is highly toxic to fish, so don't get it in any water that fish are going to. If you're near a stream or something, just be careful that you're not having any runoff go from there. And then another great option is pyganic. And that was, like I mentioned, that pyrethrin, that compound or chemical that mums make. So this is a chemical extracted from mums. It also controls soft-bodied insects, aphids, and whiteflies. Again, it's also highly toxic to fish. Read the label. This has many applications. It's used widely in organic production. Another chemical that I don't have shown here that I mentioned earlier was diatomaceous earth, which is a dust. And you have to dust it on plants, and it can control a wide range of insects, including those troublesome Colorado potato beetles. They're the scarab, shiny-looking beetles. Japanese beetles, or I'm sorry, the scarab is Japanese beetles. Colorado potato beetles are the ones that are black and they have sort of the red and yellow stripes. However, same thing with diatomaceous earth as with the insecticidal soaps. It gets washed off really easily, so you need to apply it every few days or once a week until you stop encountering problems. Diatomaceous earth is not dangerous to it at all as long as we don't breathe it into our lungs. So if you're applying it, make sure you're not breathing in the dust. You probably want to wear 1 or 2 of those masks that we all have lying around now. All right, I think I need to pause here. It's 6:47. Are we out of time, Michelle?
We are doing pretty good, and I just changed the display so everybody can see. So now's the time everybody gets to ask a question, and you should be able to see your screen. In the lower left there, you'll see the little microphones, and you can just click those off. I actually have a question. I'll just jump in here to get the ball rolling. I used diatomaceous earth for my chickens for mite control.
Mhm.
Is that good? I don't want to kill the good bugs. So how does that work for our friendly insects versus the bad ones?
Did you mix it in with their feed, or how did you?
You know, when I would just put it underneath their wings, and then when I clean the coop really good, I would just put it on the floor and then put their shavings on top to kind of control that. But if I'm using diatomaceous earth, you know, on the tomato plants, is that going to hurt the beneficial insects?
Potentially, but these have pretty low lethality for what we would consider our beneficials, which are parasitic wasps. They could potentially harm some predatory beetles. But I think most of our beneficials are going to be things like our bees, our butterflies, our parasitic wasps. And so I think in the grand scheme of things, the benefits outweigh the risk.
Okay.
I don't fully know the answer to that, but that's my partial answer.
I'll take
Great,
it.
great question.
Anybody else?
I think next time we do this, we'll set up a survey, and I'd like to hear more about what everyone's doing for growing this year. If anyone wants to share what their gardening or growing plan is, I'd be interested.
Right now, I'm just growing flowers. But I do have a question. Excuse me, growing from seeds. As far as the lighting goes, you had one LED light. That's not enough. You have to have more than one, like that big long strip light, like you'd find in a warehouse or something like that.
It depends what you're covering. So like for one, we all kind of know what a tray is, right? It's about yay big. Okay. So you don't want one fluorescent bulb for a tray, is not going to do it. That one square LED panel that I had is plenty. That'll definitely cover a tray. You want decent light intensity on all your trays. So it kind of depends. It depends how many trays you have. It depends how big your shelf is. You can see when it starts to get, once you start to see it get a little more shadowy, like on the edges of your tray, that's when you want to think about that's not enough light.
Okay.
That's not like I don't have a rule of thumb for you to use, but I know that once you set it up and start looking at it, you'll know when you have enough light or not.
So it might be better just to invest in a light instead of just that.
Instead of what, sorry?
Instead of just a single, I've got just a single, one of those long tube LEDs. And the band, you know, like band, whatever they call it, the light that it hangs with. So it's probably better to just invest in something.
I think that you could spend $50 and probably get enough additional light for a tray or two.
Okay.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I don't think if you spend $200, you're gonna get a crap ton of light. Like that one that we got was incredible. It's enough to light like a really long length, even though it's just one fixture. That wouldn't be true for other ones. And so it kind of, you come up against where, okay, am I ending up having to buy 4 of these little lights and then sort of combining them? At that point, I should just get one big one. So you kind of just buy and experiment and see what works for you with like your shelf or your windowsill, you know, and different ones are sort of easier to hang or not. Many of them come with hanging kits.
Okay.
Yeah. So just, I advise it. So like I said, I would look first on Amazon.com and also HomeDepot.com had some really good ones.
Okay. Thanks. Don't want to start something and then have it, you know, not turn out.
Yeah, you'll be able to tell pretty quick if you need
Mhm.
more, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? What are you growing this year? Does anyone want to share?
I thought the lighting piece of what you talked about was really interesting, Nicole, as well as the companion planting, because we love lavender, but I've never planted it together with our other things. And so that just gives me an even better idea. And I also didn't know last year we had pumpkins growing out of our compost heap, and they were the most beautiful pumpkins ever, but I didn't realize that they were so nutrient heavy. So now this year we can improve on that. So
Absolutely.
really interesting.
Good application of what I shared. And I ran out of time. I have a bunch of slides on soil fertility that I decided not to share today with our limited time frame. But like I said, yeah, so tomatoes and the squashes are going to be your heaviest feeders in terms of soil nutrients. So you really want to make sure that you get a lot of nutrition into your soil before you even plant.